Aloha kakeaka, everyone. The chant I'm going to do is it's a calling of our ancestors from the very deep past, and it calls for that knowledge that they've been holding for us until we're ready, and I guess we're ready now. So it goes, E hoi mai kahiki mai luna mai o nā mea una no iau e I ao e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai kahiki mai luna mai o nā mea una no iau o lahui e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai kahiki mai luna mai o nā mea una no iau o nā poe e hoi mai e hoi mai e hoi mai. I guess we start this morning off and it goes over to Heather. Did I do that right?
Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Hank Fergstrom, for bringing us to this virtual space together. Welcome, everybody. We're so happy that yet again you've joined us for our panel discussion this morning on food systems for this installment of the Rising Voices virtual meeting this summer. I'm Heather Lazarus with Forrest from the National Center for Atmospheric Research here in Boulder, Colorado, and together with Julie Maldonado from the Livelihoods Knowledge Exchange Network and wonderful support from the Olohana Foundation and Lomikai Media, we're taking Rising Voices online this summer, as you know. Just a wee bit of background for anyone who is new at this point. The Rising Voices Center for Indigenous and Earth Sciences facilitates intercultural, relational-based approaches for understanding and adapting to extreme weather and climate events, climate variability, and climate change. And the program brings together Indigenous and other scientific professionals, tribal and community leaders, environmental and community experts, students, educators, and others from across the United States, including Alaska, Hawaii, the Pacific and Caribbean islands, and even around the world, to assess critical community needs and pursue joint research really aimed at developing optimal plans for community action towards sustainability. Rising Voices acknowledges the inherent value of Indigenous systems and Indigenous sciences, adaptive practices and processes, and honors them equally. Speaking of food systems. At its core, Rising Voices aims to advance science through collaborations that bring these knowledge systems together and into partnership, and supports adaptive and resilient communities through sharing of scientific capacity and providing opportunities for Indigenous students and early career scientists through scientific and community mentoring. As I mentioned, this month we'll have this installment of the virtual Rising Voices 8 panel on food systems. And we're deeply grateful to Althea Walker and Mary Beth Yeager for moderating the panel, and hope that you'll join us again soon for the discussion sessions that are more interactive based on this panel, as well as any questions that you have for those of you watching live at the moment. Building off of all of our previous discussions so far this summer, we will continue to think about the nexus between all of these topics, as none of the topics are happening in isolation in our real lives. So with that, it is a true honor to hand this over to Althea to introduce the panel and panelists. Thank you.
Tatsumi everyone. My name is Althea Walker, and I am Nez Perce Hopi and Gila River. I am the Tribal Climate Science Liaison for the American Indian Higher Education Consortium at the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, where I provide climate adaptation support to tribes and tribal colleges and universities in California, Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. For today's session, we are certainly excited for this virtual Rising Voices 8 Food Systems panel, and to be together with all of you, even if it is virtually. We thank you again for all the time and energy you poured into these efforts, and it is an honor to sit amongst you all. For our panelists today, we've asked them to reflect on multiple questions in which they will each have about 6 to 8 minutes to provide their thoughts. Once each speaker has provided their reflections of the questions, we will have some time for discussion with everyone around the Zoom room as well as the YouTube chat. And Julie will be monitoring the chat box for YouTube, and will let us know what questions are coming from that side. The questions that we've asked the panelists to reflect on, I will read them out loud. What changes are occurring in the food system, and how are these changes important to you, your work, and your community? How does science and sovereignty respond to these changes? What are the collaborations and partnerships needed to weave together the separate policy, science, and practice strands to support our food systems? So for each of the speakers today, I will share short bios of each panelist, and then I will ask all of them to introduce themselves and then share their reflections of the questions that have been provided to them beforehand. So first, I have Dr. Michael Johnson. He is a research associate at the Native American Agriculture Fund and a Hopi tribal member and traditional dryland farmer. He received his PhD in natural resources at the University of Arizona. He has a master's of public policy degree from Pepperdine University and a Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture from Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. Becky Webster. She is an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth. She is a founding member of Ohilaku, which it means or translates to among the corn stalks. And forgive me if I pronounce any of these incorrectly, Becky. And she also, Ohilaku is a cooperative of 10 Oneida families growing roughly 6 acres of traditional heirloom corn together. Becky and her husband run a 10-acre farm called Akwakwa Sainu Nayakwayaya Thaslu, which translates to Our Foods Where We Plant Things. They focus on growing Haudenosaunee varieties of corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, and tobacco. They document their planting, harvesting, cooking, and preserving methods on their YouTube channel, Aquaqua. So please shoot on over to their page after you leave today's session. Mr. Kaya Deerenwater, he is from the Citizen Potawatomi Nation of Oklahoma. He lives in Shawnee, Oklahoma with his wife, Kathy, and 3 boys. He has been lucky enough to work for his tribe as a community garden manager for the last 3 years. He is currently pursuing a master's degree in biocultural restoration at SUNY ESF in Syracuse, New York. He received his undergraduate degree from the University of California, Davis in California, in ecological restoration and management. And lastly, Chief Sherelle Parfait Dardar. She is the traditional chief of the Grand Kayu Dulak Band of Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw. She is the secretary of the First Peoples Conservation Council of Louisiana, the chairwoman of the Louisiana Governor's Office Department of Indian Affairs Native American Commission, and the vice chair of the Terrebonne Parish Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. So those are the 4 panelists that we've invited here today with us, and I will hand it over to Dr. Johnson.
Hello, everybody, and good morning here from Hopi Land. I'm talking in a house that I've been building for the last 15 years, and it's all out of sandstone. It's built the traditional way, and in a way, it's kind of like our food system. And so, there's a lot going on out there. I think right now with COVID, and as far as some of the changes that are occurring, being on the reservation, being also brought up out here, we're having a lot of needs, and so we're having daily, every week somebody brings in a truckload of food, and one of the seeing right now is that we just have the storage facilities to house the food, and so a lot of it winds up going back, and so and that's just kind of a result of the food system breakdown. Pretty much, even in the supply chain, it's kind of like that. I do a lot of work for, well, actually, I work for NAF, the Native American Agricultural Fund, as a resource associate. So we have over 200 something grantees right now, and so we're able to look at some of what they're doing and what they're going through during this pandemic. And so a lot of it just has to do with just, like I said, the supply chain breakdown. A lot of reservations are receiving outside shipments. But a lot of reservations, what I'm finding out, they just don't have the storage capacity to do that. We're hoping that the CARES Act money, the tribes will move in that direction to start those storage facilities and take advantage of that money that's out there for those who are able to. But through the most part, our communities always had a pretty good distribution system. Before, Western concepts came out here and kind of dissolved some of that. But from the get-go, we've always had a way to distribute a lot of our products. And most of that was done, if not all of that was done by the women of our society. So my hats off to the women of our society, because they play a vital role in our agricultural system. And so they're the ones who go out and, when the seeds come in, they go out and after we bring the harvest in, the men bring the harvest in, they go out there and they look for some of the certain characteristics on the plants, and they distribute that. And then, it goes down from clan-wise to relative and so forth. So the distribution system is set. It's just that sometimes because of the problems of modernity, we're having trouble just kind of getting it out away from that. And so that's some of our problems. And, but me being a scientist, what I'm trying to do out here as Hopi is I'm trying to revitalize our agricultural system, because it's over 2,000 years old. And so a lot of techniques that we use out here work really well in our area. It's all place-based agriculture. We've got techniques that would blow your mind as far as what Hopi farmers can do, because I am a Hopi farmer. So that's what makes me, kind of a little bit different. I'm also an academic, but I'm also a farmer. And so, I'm a 250th generation farmer, by the way. So I wish anybody in Iowa would challenge me on that one, but I don't think they can, right? And so, but the problem with what I'm facing right now, at least with just trying to keep that food system intact, is we do need a little bit of help, because not as many people are farming like they used to. And so we're trying to find ways, getting more tractors up here, form co-ops and stuff like that to allow us to continue that food system. And some of our techniques, they do everything that the Natural Resource Conservation Service does as far as what their techniques offer, but they want us to basically scientifically validate them. And I keep telling them, I said, we have 2,000 years of replication. Why should we have to scientifically validate Jack? And so, You know, and so I'm just trying to, you know, work with the federal agency, and there's new laws and legislation on the books that would help with that. But so far it hasn't been enacted upon by having any rules or regulations by the Natural Resource Conservation Service called alternative funding arrangements. They haven't gone out and done a good job at outreach. But before that, there's a real good law in the book that would help with food systems called the American Indian Natural Resource Management Act. Founded in 1993, it has scholarships available for all the scientists, but unfortunately, like most Indian legislation, it's never been funded. Never been funded. You know, and it's law, but it's never been funded. And so we need to figure out ways to work with the outside. You know, right now what NAFA is doing is we're talking to the supply chain people, you know, people like Cargill and other people, and we're trying to increase the capacity on most reservations. You know, we're a 20-year trust, and so we're trying to increase the sustainability of Indian tribes and Indian people, ranchers and producers. And so by doing that, we're able to sell our products, and we're able to have value-added products on the reservation, and then instead of having to ship them anywhere and not get anything. You know, for a lot of you who don't know much about Indian country, you know, a lot of our land is leased to non-Indians. And so they're benefiting it from more than what we're doing. And so what I'm trying to do is bring everything back home. What our organization is trying to do is bring everything back home and keep it local. We should not have to go through these type of bringing in truckloads. We should be raising our own food if we're able, or we should be partnering with people who could help us to do that. And so, you know, what we're doing is very vital. And so I think I'll kind of end it right there, because sometimes I get very passionate about things. But for the most part, you know, our food system is still intact, but we just need a little bit more help keeping it more sustainable like it has been for the last 2,000 years. Thank you very much.
All right, we'll go over to Becky.
All right. Sagoi swagwe, kanyatege uniunget, sumgoy Becky Webster Nyunget Slunige, Wagwahoni Wagit to load, Oniote Agani Wagahumunjot. The Lunkawane Neat Wagenyu. So what I said is, hello everybody. My name is Ganyat Degehu, which means snow scattered here and there, trying to protect the land. My English name is Becky Webster. I'm Wolf Clan, I'm Oneida, and I grew up near Duck Creek in Oneida. So like Michael had mentioned, I'm a farmer and an academic, a newer farmer though, because farming hasn't been in our family for a long time because of the impacts of colonization and removal. So a lot of people in our community are just now getting reconnected with our agricultural roots. And so some of the things that have been happening with COVID are we're seeing that people are seeing the fragility in our food systems and how unnecessary some of the things are. Why are we getting food from so far away? What's happening locally? What's going on with our traditional foods? And combined with the movements in the past, I'd say 30 or 40 years or so, with people wanting to reconnect to our culture, food is an amazing way to do that. So this year, this spring, when we had COVID really hitting us hard and everyone was in lockdown, everyone was kind of scared about what's going to happen. We worked with our community here, and we packaged up a lot of our seeds that we grew here on our farm last year. And we handed out dozens of packets of our traditional corn, beans, squash, and our sunflowers. And we had over 20 families come to our porch to do social distance porch trades. And most of the people that came to get seeds had never grown our foods before. So it was a really amazing thing to be able to see so many people be able to have access to our seeds and then be able to grow them. So it was interesting too throughout the summer to get pictures and video from all these people on how their plants were doing. So we're being able to reestablish our relationship with those seeds, that relationship that had been severed again because of colonialism and removal. So also, I'm sure you all are well aware of the things about climate change and whatnot. So one of the things that we're noticing here in the Midwest is that our springs are wetter and the seasons are shifting. So a way to address that we're finding out here is that we're returning to our original instructions on how to farm. So we're still trying larger scale farming operations using conventional methods, but we're also returning back to our Three Sisters mound systems. That's where we plant our corn, beans, and squash together in mounds. And we're finding great success, and that the plants are a lot happier when they're planted that way. So that's something that we're going to expand on in coming years. So when asked about the questions, what is science and sovereignty, and how do they respond to these changes? So like Michael was saying, I just have to echo that when we think of science, so many of us think of something that's new and cutting edge and these great breakthroughs, but science is often reaffirming our traditional teachings, things that have been passed down from generation to generation. That's where our instructions lie, and that, I think, is what's going to take us through these changing times. So when I think of sovereignty, though, I think at its core, that's being able to make your own rules and be governed by them. But it also means that we should be able to do that without being interfered with. And we should be able to carry out those efforts without somebody else coming in there and telling us how we need to do things. So that brings up a number of issues with herbicides, pesticides, and GMO foods that grow in and around our reservations and oftentimes on our own land. So we need to be able to address those issues, and how do we do that in a systematic way that makes sense and is culturally responsible. We also have to do with others trying to patent our seed relatives, which is a whole nother discussion, but it's absolutely terrifying to see what's happening to those relatives and how they're being manipulated. So the collaborations and partnerships that I think that we need to weave together are more individuals and co-ops getting together and growing our foods. Because I think we need to take the burden off of our tribal governments themselves, because everyone keeps turning to the governments to provide these foods for us, the government to answer all of our problems. But as a community and as individuals, we have a responsibility too, that we need to reestablish our relationships with our foods, and we need to start growing them more. But the tribes still obviously have a role in that. And we have lots of land. Some tribes are very fortunate and have a lot of agricultural land or ranch land or what have you. And a lot of non-members are using that land. I think we need to find out different ways to have our tribal members have access to that land and make that land available. And also tribal governments have a lot of expertise. You know, they have staff who know, they've gone to school, they know about science, and they also have different people in there that know how to weave that modern science into our traditional teachings and have them work together, and then can provide that expertise to the membership to be able to figure out these things. So our co-op here in Oneida, which is Ohelagu, there's about 10 families, and we did rely quite a bit on the tribe to be able to help us with experimenting with different cover cropping and interseeding methods. So we did rely on them quite a bit to be able to help us out. And also the land that we're using, the tribe is letting us lease that for free. So I think more opportunities like that should be made available to different community groups. And then the last thing, I think one of the things that could help is grants for infrastructure. So there's a lot of grants that are out there. Oftentimes they're only available to tribes or 501c3s or what have you. But I think that we need to focus on individual tribal member farmers or informal co-ops and be able to grant for more things than, you know, travel or maybe some fertilizer or something, but actual tangible things like infrastructure. So when we talk about that, sometimes the folks at the federal government, they'll say, well, we can give you loans, but that's not always the answer, because a lot of us aren't growing our foods to, you know, make a profit. That we don't always do that. So here on our farm, we don't sell any of our food. We trade it and we barter it and we gift it to people, because that's just our philosophy and how we run things. So if we were to get a loan out for something, we don't have the means to be able to repay that the way we would if we were a commercial farmer. So those are just some of my thoughts that I had, and I will pass it off to Kaya.
Thank you, Becky. Kaya? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Bojo, Nchuenmo Yeyangom, Jawano and Deshnakas, Mko Ododum, Shishi Benyak and Deb and Douglas. I said, hi, I'm Kaya Deerenwater, and I'm happy to be here today. My Indian name is Shawano, or Southern Wind, and I'm Bear Clan. I really liked what Becky had to say, and you know, without going into too much of the similar stuff, the challenge, or not the changes that I've seen here over the past few years that I've been working here, is that there is so much interest in growing our traditional crops and rekindling our relationships with those ancestral foods, those first foods. And we have a few online forums, and there are daily posts about, reconnecting to food and, seeds and growing food and harvesting food, all of that. And also from my preliminary research, I have my community surveys also show that people are hungry for this knowledge. They're eager to learn, to relearn these ways that, have been severed because of colonialism. And here at the Nation, we have a community garden, and I've been lucky enough to manage it for the last few years. However, and we're trying to grow all of our heritage crops, which is, an acclimation process, because Oklahoma is our homelands now, but it's not our original homelands. So all of our ancestral seeds came from the Great Lakes region. And so we're in a multi-year process of acclimating these seed relatives to Oklahoma. And, finding out ways to have that be more successful. And we're also doing lots of cooking classes and herbal tea demos, and just trying to get some of that knowledge and hunger for that knowledge out there, and to put it out in the community, because there's a lot that doesn't get done because of people's 9-to-5 jobs and everything that goes on in daily life. So we're also starting a seed library, which hopefully we will be able to have all of our heritage crops available to all our tribal citizens. And then, at the end of the year, the way that seed libraries work is that at the end of the growing season, you return some of that so that that library can keep going and hopefully sustain itself. All these are really important first steps. And, I think, like Becky said, we're also at the beginning of our journey in rekindling these food systems and food knowledge. Sorry. So this science, first off, I really like the intro to this session, because I was going to say something about how growing food from an Indigenous perspective is science. And so that in and of itself, we don't need validation from Western scientists or from Western ways of knowing. Like Michael said, we have generations of replications. We don't need to go through that process as much. And as for the policies and partnerships that we could build, here it would take a bunch of different people coming together in a co-op style situation, and renting some land, because right now I'm the only person that is employed to do this kind of work, and within the tribe. So building off of that, it's going to take some outside resources and collaborations with other organizations in the Great Lakes or organizations here in Oklahoma. But yeah, there's nowhere to go but up from here. I'm really hopeful, and I like that there is so much enthusiasm around all of these subjects. and I will leave it at that. Miigwech.
Thank you, Kaya. Sherelle?
Halito, como sea jutui. So of course that's hello, and I'm asking everybody how they're doing today. Of course, I'm down here in Louisiana, and we're along the coast. So to get into what changes are occurring, I have to say, while it's all connected, it's a little different depending on where you live, right? Like in our area, we're subsistence people, and we live off of the land and the water, and we care for and we protect our environment to the best of our abilities. It's an exchange, a respect. Currently for us, we see lots of pollution, harmful pesticide use, GMOs. The worst of it is like the abuse of the animals and our planet to feed the people. The food system is broken and failing because the people have made it that way, right? And we need to return to a more compassionate food system. At one time, my people had community gardens. They kept small livestock like chickens and goats. They shrimp, they fished, and due to the land loss and erosion due to the cutting of the canals for oil and gas exploration and extraction, and the impacts of climate change, thanks to the lack of planet and human rights-based policy, our traditional practices are becoming harder and harder to do. And our traditional harvesters that work the waters are becoming extinct, and they can't find work due to a lack of education in other fields, you know? So my community has been slowly dying since about the 1940s. And it's from a loss of like economic opportunities, failing health, and due to the lack of responsibility and accountability on the part of those in power. We're quickly losing our traditional foods. The livelihoods of our people are disappearing, and with it, our culture and ultimately our identity. And we're not alone in this. It just so happens that we're one of the communities that are along the front lines of what's happening with this. So thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Athea.
I will actually turn it over to Mary Beth, in which she will be leading the Q&A portion of the session. So Mary Beth.
Bonjour, Mary Beth Deshnakas. Shoreline Deutsch via Bodomwanamikwe. Hello, I'm Mary Beth Yeager. I am currently working and coming from you from the homelands of the Salish, Coastal Salish, Domamish, and Snohomish peoples up in the Seattle area. I am citizen Potawatomi, and I'm also Chicana with that too. And I work as a research analyst at the Native Nations Institute at the University of Arizona, where we're working on strengthening Indigenous governance in a variety of ways. And so I want to thank miigwech to all the panelists for all your words and wisdom that you have provided so far. So thank you so much for your time, miigwech, for the time you've taken today to do this. I'm going to look, do we have any questions from the audience at this point? We do not. Okay. So one question I had, and there's slowly starting to be answered a little bit here and there, but there was the, how do we reconnect, or how do we reconnect people back to the lands? And there was some examples used. Is there any further examples that people have seen or in your communities that have been done, or that you'd like to share further on? And anybody can answer that question. Or if you are also dealing, like as Chief Charles was talking about, you know, watching things decay or erode, has there been ways that you've seen that people have stepped up to help stop that too, with that, or bringing people being connected in that land in that way? And I will, Paulette,
I also live here in Oklahoma, and the growing food here is always a challenge because of the weather extremes we have had in the past couple of days. We've got almost 4 inches of rain, and of course, in 24 hours, 3.5 inches of it came down. And so then we have the hail, and then we have the extreme heat, and so on and so forth. So here, my family, we built a subterranean greenhouse to not only try to accommodate the weather extremes and try to somehow mitigate it, but also to be able to grow throughout the winter. And that's just one challenge that we've tried to address in fam here. Thank you.
Our thing out here is Hopi is that, there are quite a few farmers out here. I mean, we're very fortunate that we weren't, relocated anywhere. We've always been here. But the problem that I see right now is that we just the supplies that we have are dwindling. Back in the old days before, we had tractors and all the other stuff we have now, we were told to keep enough seeds on hand to last us 3 to 5 years. Traditionally, that's what we're supposed to do, because if you look at the El Nino and El Nina weather pattern, they follow that pattern, 3 to 5 years. And so, I'm just trying to increase the supply. So, what I see out here happening is that I see organizations like the Hopi Permaculture, they're actually hiring, working with Vista and Peace Corps, and they're actually employing their own people out here. They're getting the youth involved. And I think that's a tremendous thing that they're doing. We have another organization, I can't remember the name, but they're also doing something similar where they're outsourcing their people that they get on board to help restore springs, things like that. And I don't know, I know we're all farmers, but, I just kind of want to say something. We're able to raise crops out here on only 6 to 10 inches of annual rainfall a year, corn, and stuff like that. When I was at Cornell, they told me I needed 33 inches of rainfall a year. And I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, you guys got some wheat corn back there, and things like that. And I'm just, but the variables by raising things traditionally, at least at Hopi, there are so many different variables. That's why you have conventional farming, because, they eliminate those variables. That's why they have pesticides and herbicides. But at the same time, they eliminate the environment, and they bring great harm to the environment. And so we found ways traditionally to deal with all those variables. Not every year do I get a crop, but I think the thing that stands the most and what makes Hopi is that our faith and our ceremonies are directly tied to what we do as farmers. That's what makes us so resilient, because without our faith, we would not be able to raise the crops, nor would we want to raise the crops. We don't look at crops as a commodity, but we look at them as our relatives, right? And so, we're able to try to bridge that gap. And so my thing right now is trying to figure out ways to form a bigger farmer co-op, get tractors out here, that would do that. And the only reason I would use tractors now is because I said, like, the population, when I was a young man, we had something like 14 people. Our relatives would show up and we put in a field in less than an hour. Our fields are relatively small. They're only 1 to 2 acres, sometimes a little bigger. And so, but we just don't have the kids' interest in that anymore, the people to come out and do that. And so we're trying to form those again, but it's kind of hard because everybody wants to get paid, right? And that's why I have like NRCS use some of their funding, and that's why the alternative funding arrangements are necessary, because they're able to increase that labor pool to pay people to come out and do things. They should be doing things because that's who they are, but unfortunately that's the reality of the situation. And so, I'm out here in the middle of nowhere, if I call it that, I call it my homeland, but it seems like the middle of nowhere to the rest of America, because the rest of America still thinks we're invisible. And let me touch on one more point on that. We're out here collecting a lot of data. There are organizations, what they call aggregate data. It's big data. But because we're a small culture and a small people, we need to collect what they call disaggregate data. That would allow us to have our stories, our problems out more and be more visible. I get pushback when I say that, because you said you're only 1% of the population. But yes, we're 1% of the population, but indigenous people sit on 80% of this world's biodiversity, for Pete's sake. And so it's very important that we have our techniques and our practices and our food systems held intact, and we should not be invisible. So we need to focus things like on the census and the farm bill. We need to focus more on disaggregate data to get those issues across. and being a scientist, I'm here to help with that. And so, in working with NNI, I'm going to start working with NNI pretty soon, I hope. And so we're able to try to form these partnerships because we all have the same goal. And for our goal, like most Indigenous people, is about survival. It's not about economics, even though economics is part of that, but it's generally about survival. And so that's probably much. I'll leave it at that, I guess. So thanks for asking the question, Mary Beth.
Yeah, and I want to say a stream that we're hearing through all your comments is that the importance of relational accountability, and it's not just to each other as people, but also to all our non-human kin, to the land, to the spiritual beliefs and whatnot that we have as people too. And so that's something that's really important to keep considering, as that relational accountability that you all are talking about. And so we do have a question from the audience. It's from Leah Dudley. Is there a concentrated effort to think about climate changes and how that might affect traditional farming practices and or seed varieties?
One of the things that we're trying to do here on our farm, like I mentioned before, is returning to our traditional growing methods of the mounds to be able to protect our foods from getting too wet, because the climate change predictions show the Midwest becoming a giant swamp. So we're returning to those methods. But one of the things too that we do is we're growing a variety of our traditional corn, which is the Oneida white flour corn. It's a shorter growing season corn. It's between about 95-day corn, which is a little bit different than the corn our community has grown in the past, which is the Tuscarora white corn, which most of the communities throughout the Haudenosaunee Confederacy grow. The issue with that is it's 110-day corn. So in order to do that here in the Midwest, we need to really get in right after the frost, get that in the ground and be able to harvest it before it starts to frost again because of our relatively short growing seasons. So we're trying to bring back our seeds that are more compatible. And we were removed from what is now known as the state of New York, but fortunately we were moved to a location that has very similar climate, or it did back then. So that's just one of the things that we're trying to do to combat climate change. But we also know that any of the seeds that had survived, especially last year, where it was really, really crazy weather, that those seeds are survivors. And those seeds that made it through that season and came to us in the fall and ripened for us to be able to harvest, those are the seeds that are going to be able to bring us through this climate change. So we need to take extra care to protect those seeds and keep them going.
Thank you.
You hear things, about that collaborative question and stuff like that. There's a piece of work out there called the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Doctrine. It's a UN declaration, and in there's some powerful stuff. But unfortunately, the United States government never seems to sign on to anything that comes out of the United Nations. And so, we're only indigenous as long as the United States thinks we're indigenous. I mean, that's the unfortunate way we look at things here. And we could look back and blame that all on the doctrine of discovery, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's the doctrine that gave Indian people the right to occupancy, but not the right to title. And so, we need to look at some of this legislation that was in the books if we really want to get that back. As far as seeds are concerned, I'm of the event, not to knock the seed organizations out there, but we need to be growing these things out every year because the environment changes every year. We should not warehouse these seeds like they have in Norway and stuff like that, because when they come out of there and you try to grow them in a different climate, chances are they're not going to go anywhere. They're gonna suffocate. And so, at Hopi, what Rebecca was saying, I heard stories and I've seen stories where we have a drought year and we'll store that corn away for another drought year. And so, our planting depths up here, when we talk about place-based, are anywhere from 6 to 18 inches. Our corn can come up from 18 inches below the ground, believe it or not. And our system is place-based. So I think when we're talking about indigenous seeds, a lot of them are place-based. They don't grow anywhere else. I cannot take my corn to New York and expect it to do well. Probably get scared because it probably never see rain before. but I'm just of the opinion that we need to bring those seeds out, and as far as selling them to other people, that's up to that tribe if they want to do that. I'm not a big fan of that, only because there's no rules to protect what we give away. If we could come up with better rules, maybe tack it onto the farm bill that would protect what we are giving away, so that nobody like Monsanto or Bayer can come in and just exploit that, which they have been for the last 50 or so years. We need to do that. But it's hard to do because the legislation out there is geared towards protecting the corporations rather than just protecting the small farmers. And so, but we can do that. But we need to really get out there and have a public policy campaign to do that, because right now, like I said, Indians for the most part are still invisible. During the civil rights movement, while everybody was looking for equality, Indians were looking for recognition. And so we need to get more on the train here and be part of the process rather than part of the problem, and so that's about all I'll say on that one. Thanks a lot.
I'd like to touch on what Dr. Johnson was speaking about in regards to like policy, right? So we really must have those in power who determine what is acceptable for human consumption working together, point blank. It's not that complicated to create a system of health-based food systems that maintain the highest level of responsibility to the planet and the people. The science proves what is and isn't healthy for human consumption. And it's up to our elected officials to create policies based on scientific knowledge that promotes a healthy planet and people, economic development, good faith practices, right? There's no good reason why our planet and people should be in the predicament that we're in today with our current food system. What's gotten us here is recklessness, ignorance, and greed, period. Our nation of Grand Cayuga is part of a team that's working with the scientists, right? Because that's what we have. We need scientific validation today. And we're also working with agencies and organizations to promote a healthy planet and a return to a more responsible and compassionate way of food gathering and harvesting. If you want to see some of the current projects, look to the First Peoples Conservation Council of Louisiana. We're an association formed to provide a forum for Native American tribes in coastal Louisiana to identify and solve natural resource issues on our tribal lands. And we've been hard at work since 2013. We're learning to creating more positive progress every day with amazing partners like the Lowlander Center, and they support lowland communities for the benefit of the people and the environment. So there's hope for my people and all the people, right? We have to have faith. And, so that's my take on that one.
Okay, I saw you had a comment, and then we have another question in the chat, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to address the question about the concentrated efforts on climate change. I think there is beginning in Potawatomi lands and Potawatomi communities, there is beginning to be some conversations that are to have taken place around that subject, because we are peoples that are spread across 5 different states and around 1,000 miles apart. So last summer at the gathering of the Potawatomi Nation, which is all 9 bands getting together, we held a talk or a discussion with the elders and with community members specifically about plant knowledge and food and how we are going to address that with climate change. And I think there was some good, what we took away from that was that there's lots of people that know things, but they're too isolated to all be connected, and that there needs to be some kind of way to connect those dots, and we can't just meet once a year like we do and have things magically start growing. in terms of not the food, but in terms of the community efforts towards climate change. And I think there in the past you see like there are communities in the north of us that have southern plant medicines. So we know that people did move plants around and that they were adaptable and that it is possible. So we talked about like assisted migration and, taking seeds from Kansas and having people in Michigan grow them for the inevitability of climate change. Yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Miigwech.
It's a good question. Althea just posted too. So we have two left. I think we still have some time. Can we do 2 more questions before? Okay, great. So Eileen Shea from the audience has asked, the recognition of perils with El Nino patterns should be of great interest to all climate scientists. How do we increase sharing while retaining tribes and intellectual ownership?
I'm sorry, Mary Beth, can you repeat the question?
Yes, I can. The recognition of parallels with the El Nino pattern should be of great interest to all climate scientists. How do we increase sharing while retaining tribes' intellectual ownership?
Let me answer that question. That was a question when I went to get my PhD that I still kind of continually struggle with. How much of our knowledge is available? Because it's very hard, working with Western scientists and knowing my traditions pretty well, that it's very hard to bring those two together, to bring that bridge that gap that exists, that communication gap. And so, it's really kind of up to the individual. When I talk about things, I don't go into the ceremonial aspects or anything like that. I just talk about straight up science. And this is similar. You ever thought about this? I don't break off into that section. And so a lot of what I talk about is just strictly scientific based, but I'm also, because I have a science background, I'm also very cognizant of what people are looking for, what science is looking for, because science sometimes goes down the yellow brick road and they don't hit Oz, they hit something else, right? And so, we need to figure out, ways to do that. So to answer that question shortly, it's kind of up to the individual and how he feels, but it's a very hard path to navigate, when it comes to that. And so it's kind of an individual choice, and you are going to get slapped around. I've got, a few people don't like some stuff what I do because they feel like I'm doing off things on my own, but that's just Hopi. Hopi's always about trying to, bring you back into the community in some aspect. And so, it's all about that. But I don't mind getting my head chopped off once in a while, because I'm looking at the greater good. And so as long as I continue to do that, my heart will remain humble. And so that's about all I'll say on that. Thanks a lot.
Becky?
Yeah, so just to add on to that a little bit, so as a recovering attorney, I'm putting my hat on about our intellectual property rights and whatnot, but I think sometimes we need to get over ourselves, and we need to be able to release some of that information to each other. It feels like we're so worried about somebody else getting a hold of this information or somebody else doing something terrible with this information that we're not sharing it with each other throughout the Indigenous communities. So I think we need to form more alliances within our communities and recognize that other communities are going to hold that information safe also, but that we're in this together. We need to be able to figure out how to handle this together, and when we share that information, be cognizant that it might get out there. And if it gets out there, then that's what happens. But we have to also be aware that the non-Indian community, which the majority of the rest of us around us they're in this with us too. So a lot of times they're looking to us for how are we solving these problems? What are we doing? What do your teachings say about that? So they're getting more interested in what it is that we're doing, because I think they know that we may have some of the answers that modern science isn't going to be able to provide them. So I would just wish that more of our communities would be more open about sharing the information, but being able to draw a line between, what is our ceremonial stuff, what is stuff that's not culturally appropriate to share with anybody, but being able to know that distinction within ourselves and not being so afraid to share information that we should be sharing with people.
Miigwech for that. All right. Any other comments before we move on to the next question? So Althea asked, how do us as urban Indians support and stay connected to our food systems? Any advice, insight, personal experiences?
I would say go home more. That's a short and simple answer is you need to go home more. We all come from a place, right? And so, to do that, I was running around out there in Winslow. I grew up in Winslow pretty much all my life, but now I'm home. And so, but I remember as a young child, my dad dropping me off out here to learn how to farm with my grandfather. And so I spent a lot of summers out here. And so, it's to me, it's about going home. You can't make piki bread in Phoenix, because there's nowhere to make piki bread unless you use a griddle, but you don't do it like that, right? And so, you have to go home. And fortunately, we all do have a home. This will always be my place. And lucky, I'm one of the lucky ones that we've been here way beyond Columbus and everybody else who so-called discovered America. And so, we need to go home. And so, come on home, Athea, if you want to come out here. I've got my neighbor just gave me about a dozen white corn ears from this year. And so come on home. That's about the answer to that question.
Anybody else would like to add insights, perspective to that? Paulette?
Yeah, that some urban Indians are on their homes, and that's the challenge in some areas. We can't just assume that all Indian peoples, especially urban Indians, have been relocated through the Relocation Act. Some of them actually are on their homelands, and they are in the middle of cities nowadays. So I think it's important that some of us that do have the privilege in some ways of being on either our allotments or in our reservations or in our homelands, be willing to reach out and that exchange that Rebecca spoke about, that cultural exchange, that is traditional. We used to have, summer gatherings where tribes would come together. The whole city of Cahokia and all of these other ancient cities were gathering places where different tribes from different regions would come together and exchange and share and learn from each other and trade. And then we'd all go back to our respective places. I think those kinds of things are still relevant today, even more so in some ways. I think it's really critical almost to reach out to our urban Indian youth and help them establish an identity beyond the urban Indian gangster stereotype that is the culture that many urban Indian youth are clinging to nowadays. I grew up in LA when I was young. I've lived in South San Jose. So I see it and I know it exists. My brothers both bought into it at one point in time in our youth. So that's a really good question, and it's really timely and relevant because as things, not when, because they are already shifting towards extremes of food insecurities like the pandemic has shown us, but also climate change is warning us, they would get worse. And as urban Indian youth are equipped and empowered with food sovereignty and food knowledge and the capacity and capabilities to turn lawns into gardens, as opposed to, becoming the gangster to try to fight for food instead of being empowered by it. I think that is something that we should think more about and get more engaged and involved in. Thanks.
Go ahead, Sherelle, and then Kaya.
Thank you. All right, so as a Bayou Indian, yeah, we're in a very strange situation here. We do have our tribal citizens that are technically still on our homelands, but within the urban areas today. And then we have the bayous, right, which are quickly eroding. So while they can still come home, we're starting to bring home to them, because we used to be able to community gardens and small livestock and things like that. Well, due to random flooding events, right, and we have water that just stays for days, our teachings have always been that you suffer nothing, right? So you're not going to keep small livestock in an area that's prone to flooding randomly, and suffer the animals. You're not going to attempt to grow gardens, directly into the ground, knowing that you're going to kill your plants off with the salt water that's coming in. So we're an adapting people. We've been adapting for many, many generations because of where we live. And that's another thing that we've begun to do, working with different agencies and organizations and saying, okay, we are quickly starting to lose traditional practices. What can we do to save them? How can we adapt to these changes? And if it can't stay where you are, bring it to them. So we have small gardens in urban areas, to where they can plant small crops, small medicinal plant gardens, keep chickens for eggs and things like that, and then share it back to the elders and things in the community, right? So here we're rebuilding what has been lost, so to speak. And it's actually turning out to be a pretty good system. And we're all about sharing that knowledge in what works, because we know that, we've had to be an adaptive tribe, and we know that we're not the only ones that are facing that. So every opportunity that we get, we like to share our achievements.
Thanks, Kaya.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think in a way we're all urban Indians, like, for example, what are we doing right now? Like, we're all meeting on Zoom in, all different country or all different states. And I don't think there's really a corner of this continent that isn't affected somewhat by technology and colonialism. So I just kind of like to put that out there, and, maybe we're all, like you said, we're all in this together, and we're all working from slightly different angles, but we're working at the same goal. And on the micro level, I grew up in urban California, and there are loads of medicinal plants and gardens, and you just really got to do some exploring and find your places. It's still there. It's just might be incognito. Now, if you're talking about your cultural food systems, that may be harder to do, but I think you can connect a place without being in your ancestral homelands if you're currently living somewhere in an urban area. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I also want to add that Kaya's created a CPN, Citizen Potawatomi, like a garden group. And so like, it's great to see, as someone who, I'm not on my homelands, obviously, getting to see like what is coming up in Oklahoma, and that's reminders of like where we are in the seasons, and getting to see the plants grow there and stuff. And it's something I've really enjoyed. But we have another question from the audience. Valerie A. Small, Dr. A. Valerie Small, have there been any efforts to develop trade between Indigenous communities, food, not seed, and then also to go along with that, in connection to that question, are there ways that trade is used to adapt and build resilience to climate and weather impacts? All right, Becky.
Sure. So that's one of our goals of our co-op that we established. And actually, I think it was probably about 5 years ago, one of my friends took some of my corn, about 30 pounds of my corn, and then some other things, and went down to the Southwest and traded for beans and whatnot. So what we're trying to do is reestablish our traditional trade routes. 2 years ago, we went down to Ecuador, and there was about 20 of us Oneidas. We hired a bus driver and he drove us around the country. It was the wildest and craziest trip ever, but it was amazing because we had planned out different visits to visit with Indigenous corn growers there. And we had an amazing cultural exchange at every stop. And just for example, at one of the stops, we brought some of our corn there, and we were telling them how we were cooking it. And then we showed them, they had a clay pot handy. We put it in there, put some ashes in there with some water, and we set it over the fire and boil it. And through a translator, of course, we were explaining that this is how we cook our corn. And then an elderly lady looked at me and said, "That's how we cook our corn too." Like, oh my gosh, duh. I mean, why wouldn't I think that you would cook like this? Because that's how we exchange information and we exchange knowledge and we do things similar, because we have such a rich history. We have these elaborate trade routes that were throughout North and South America that had been disrupted. So we're trying to move more of our corn around. We have a lot of trades with the folks, the Ojibwe folks in upper Minnesota and upper Wisconsin for their wild rice. So we're still trying to negotiate pound for pound trading, and there's some disputes about which is harder to harvest, it's corn or rice. And there's all kinds of really great stuff, but we've traded for salmon, bear meat. We've even done things like trading for, when we were building our house a couple years ago, we traded for labor for that. We had singing lessons, we had haircuts. So all these different things, we're trying to take the monetary value out of our foods. And also because people are like looking for our foods and they say, "How much is it?" And they say, "Well, we don't sell it." And they say, "But I don't have anything to offer." And I said, "But I'm sure you do." And then we think of different things that they can contribute, because so many times people think that their only worth is how much their salary is or how much money they make. But we have to change that mindset so people can understand that these are our food relatives. They have a huge responsibility to us, but we also have a responsibility to them. And by sharing and trading with other people, we recognize their strengths and their importance as community members. And we then recognize the importance and responsibilities of growing and sharing that food. So I think it's really gets the value going without having to worry about that in monetary terms.
Thank you. Paulette?
I'd like to contribute to that line of discussion for Rebecca, because one of the things that I admire most in Indian country is how Dan Cornelius with his Agricultural Food Council has worked really interactively with different tribes and created opportunities for people to buy food, not just the seed exchange, but the actual food products from each other. And I've always just thought that was kind of cool, because there are some, there's no way I'm going to be able to grow wild rice in Oklahoma. I mean, at least not that kind of wild rice. I mean, and it would be interesting to see how that might happen in the future over a long period of transition or whatever for the plant. But the reality is that this is not wild rice country. So I think those kinds of opportunities for us to share foods like that. And I give the Oneidas a lot of props, because they've done a lot with incorporating their food systems into their schools, into all kinds of different programs. And I've had the opportunity to go up and tour some of their programs and stuff, and be at the sustainability farm and all these different, with Kyle White and other people up in that region. And I'm just really grateful that they are doing those things, because I'm learning from them and trying to incorporate my tribe into thinking like that and engaging in those kinds of techniques to do these kinds of foods exchanges and, plant and harvest enough to exchange and stuff like that. Or when we have surplus, with that kind of consideration. So thank you, Rebecca, and the Oneida people and the relatives up there for doing these kinds of work.
Anybody else would like to add? All right, we have one more question. This will be our last one. It's from the audience, from Christina Peterson. How are folks protecting and enhancing their fishing practices? Yes, Chief Sherrill.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, yeah, and I always talk about how we're a subsistence community, right? And one of the main things that we do is we have shrimp, fish, crabs, oysters, biganos, snails. There we go. That's the that's the right word in English. And squid, right? Those are we're predominantly seafood and vegetable community. It's a little tricky here in Louisiana, right? And the coastal tribes here lack federal acknowledgement, so we do not have some of the protections that some of the federally acknowledged tribes have, right? However, we work very, very closely with USDA and RCS. We also work extremely closely with the Lowlander Center, thank goodness, kicking ass every day, to look at the different policies that are in place and the different legislation that's in place that affects not just our people, but all people in our coastal communities surrounding seafood and harvesting. Recently, due to the impacts of COVID, just to give you an example, Garrett Graves' office, which is Congressman Graves, had done a shrimp deal. I think it was like 20 million pounds of shrimp was to have been purchased, to assist our traditional harvesters during the impacts of COVID. Well, not a lot of information came through about that. So we contacted his office and wanted to know all of the details surrounding that, only to find out that they had only gotten as far as the processing plants and the larger vessel harvesters, right? And that deal was basically already done. And it didn't come down to the main support of that industry, which are our traditional harvesters, right? So we quickly did everything we possibly could to address those issues. And I want to believe in my heart that the following thing that came forward was the newer deal that came through with USDA for the $30 million purchase of shrimp, which was supposed to be done for our traditional harvesters to be able to receive money and get their fair share from that and be able to contribute. However, we have yet to hear back from Scalise's office, who was basically supposed to be one of the front runners of this. And yeah, that's not cool, right? It really isn't. While we applaud them for sort of listening and kind of doing something, in hearing what we were talking about and addressing these issues, they're not doing it all the way. And that's part of our job, right? Is to look at what's happening and to quickly respond to these things and also offer direction. And quite frankly, if you're not going to do it the right way, then we're going to tell you how to do it the right way. And I have no problem doing that. I stayed in Garrett Graves' assistant's ear for days, right? Trying to give them direction on what needed to happen. And, because at the end of the day, it really is up to each of us to do our part to protect our traditional practices. And in my area, most of those practices revolve around seafood, right? And, community gardens. And while it's been an extreme challenge, it hasn't stopped us and it's not going to stop us, right? And that's exactly what we're doing here with all of you today. So, thank you for that opportunity as well.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to add? Okay, so to wrap this up, what is one key message takeaway you'd like to share with everybody that you'd like everybody to take away from this session today?
Well, my message is kind of simple. You got to just grow it. You got to do it yourself. You got to go out there and be the initiator. That's my thing. Just don't sit back and wait upon the government like some people were saying. Take action. Go up to the store and buy some seeds, plant them. experiment, because that's what farming is about anyway. A lot of it's about experimentation, right? And so, so just like the Nike commercial said, just do it, go out there and do it, and, worry about the rest later, because it's important to find out who you are. And I think by planting and by fishing and everything else, gives you time to think, gives you time to realize who you are. And so that's my take-home message, is just identify yourself through whatever means is possible. And so, because you're your own best friend in reality. And as long as you're happy, everybody else is happy. And so that's kind of a fluffy type of thing, but that's where I'm going to leave it at.
Thank you, Michael. Becky.
So my takeaway message would just be to remember that we're in this together, and that we are the product of generations of colonization. So it's okay if we don't know, and it's okay if we've lost that connection. Just don't be afraid to reach out to other people, because there are people that have held on to that knowledge, and they've held it on to it for generations, and they're there so that they can share it with us so that we can reform those connections.
Thank you. Chief Sherrill.
Well, I'd actually like to ask a favor of everybody watching today. Please keep everyone here in Louisiana and Texas that have been impacted by Hurricane Laura in prayer. Our coastal tribal communities are very familiar with the challenges faced during storms. And, these impacted communities are experiencing not only intersecting risk of extreme toxic pollution, food loss, intensified food insecurity, especially with communities of color who are the most affected, being further marginalized, basically squeezed out, erased through the official recovery response. And along with the lack of support for small scale and subsistence fishers, deeply impacted by the economic downturn during COVID. So please just keep everybody in these areas in your prayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaya.
Hi, I'd like to leave off by saying, we're all friends and relatives now, so we should all stay in contact with each other and continue to build these relationships, because we're all in it together.
Thank you. We did have people have the opportunity, if any of the speakers wanted to share a recipe, and then we're going to pivot towards what's coming up next, and closing. Did anybody have a recipe that they had wanted to share? I think Becky might have.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's possible to share the recipe in the description of the box, but it's a maple berry turtle ganastohal, which is our cornbread. So we make that with our traditional berries that we harvest, our maple syrup during maple sugar time, and then our corn. So it's super delicious, and we just had a little modern take on it by pushing the cakes into a miniature cake turtle, so that when you take it out, it looks like a turtle. So it's super, super cute. And I can also send you a link to a YouTube video on how that walks you through that process too. I'm not sure if there's a way to put that YouTube link in this YouTube description box or something. I'll figure a way to get it to you folks.
That sounds delicious. Thank you, Becky. Michael?
I got one. It's kind of my favorite. It's called Tahershniki or something like that. And so you do is you take. It doesn't matter. For me, it doesn't matter. You can take the corn you buy at the store. You can take. We take our corn and you take the kernels off of it. You always save the husk. The kernels off of it, and you put it in a blender, and you don't add sugar or anything like that. And you blend it up, and then you take that what's left of when you'll get kind of like a mixture. And then you put that in the corn husk that you take off the corn, you wrap it up, and then you roast it in the oven, maybe about 450 until you be able to stick a fork in it and it's kind of soft in there. And it's beautifully, it just tastes good. You don't need to add sugar to it because you don't need to do that. But that's one of our delicacies out here. And so we only do that during this time of year because our corn's coming in. And so, but roasting it, it's like a tamale, but without the meat in it. So it's really good. You can do that with any corn that I'm aware of, as long as it's got that white milky stage to it, or whatever corn you're growing. So that's about it.
Great, thank you. Also very delicious. I'm getting hungry listening to these recipes. Is there anybody else? If not, I'm going to hand it over to Julie. Yes, no, yes, Cheryl?
All right. So, well, you got to make it a meal now, you know. So, shrimp boulettes are balls, so to speak, right? So, of course, you take your shrimp, you know, nice fresh peeled, and you're going to grind all of these things together, right? Till it's like this nice mush. So you have your shrimp, you have your onions, your celery, your green peppers. You know, you put some salt, some pepper, maybe some Tony Chachere's in there for flavor. You know, you grind that all up, and then you scoop them. Now let's be healthy, so we say air fryer, right? That's a healthier way to go today. But we like to deep fry it, and you know, you scoop like teaspoon size amounts into your grease or into your air fryer, whatever you prefer to use. You know, and you fry them up, and oh my gosh, that's like the best thing ever. It's my favorite meal, and naturally you're gonna want to have that, you know, with some white beans and rice, right? That's the best meal ever, and you know, I'll be more than happy to share with the audience afterwards.
So excited. Oh, that's delicious. I have lunchtime coming up soon here on the West Coast, so. All right. Kaya, do you have anything? Or I'll put it over to, yes?
Sure, yeah. While she was talking about family meals, there's a meal that I like making, and it's just Manoman Stew or wild rice stew. And really it's you throw a couple some vegetables, an onion, a couple carrots, a couple celery stalks into the bottom of a pot. You know, saute them, then you put your stock in there, and in the meantime, you've got your turkey breast cooking or your chicken or whatever you want in the oven, and you put the pot on the oven to cook, and cube some butternut squash up, throw it in there too, and the wild rice, and about the time the turkey's done, about an hour and a half later, 2 hours later, your Manoman stew is ready, and you just get to shred in your turkey and throw it in there, and a pot of that will last for in my household, last a few days. We can eat off of it, and it's nice, healthy, nutritious food. Oh.
Mega Witch, I'm coming to Shawnee. I'm gonna eat at your house, I think. Some stew there. All right, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Julie. Thank you everybody for sharing your recipes too.
Thank you, Mary Beth and Althea and everyone. I'm somewhere between wanting to go eat grandma's tamales and coming over to Chief Sherrell's for shrimp brulee, and I'm just going to keep making the rounds after that. So, you know, should make it everywhere by, you know, next Monday or Tuesday. Huge thanks to everyone here for all the wisdom and knowledge shared, and just I feel like it's just kind of flowing over, and excited to go back and just rewatch the video as well and continue to learn from you all. We hope, you know, this video will be posted and shared out with the Rising Voices community to also really build towards the Food Systems Working Group session on September 25th. And so we'll be sending information out about that, and really hope that everyone can be there in community with us on that day. We will be interactive and breaking groups, and everyone will be participating. And leading up to that, I think that we can find, right, that this conversation and discussion feeds both the mind and the heart and the soul and our bellies. And so in that, I think, you know, we're all looking for more ways to get creative, maybe get out of our, you know, normal zones and boxes a little bit. So we invite you all, just as our wonderful speakers have done, to please share, you know, any recipes that you would like to share with everyone. Send them my way. I'll compile it together. You know, only share things, of course, that are publicly shareable, because what we'll do, we'll just, you know, we'll compile it together. If there's any pictures you want to show, you know, cooking together, the food itself, you know, gathering it, you know, send those over. We'll compile it, send it out to folks. I think especially, you know, in this time of COVID as well, of you know, ways to get creative and enjoy some new treats together. And so thank you hugely to everyone for being on today, for your time, your energy, everything that you put into your work with so much passion. and much gratitude for this family gathered here. With that, we will give it over to Hank to close us out today. Thank you.
Aloha, everybody. In relationship to all the storms that we've been having, the fires and stuff that's been going along with COVID, there's a lot of anxiety that gets built up in us. It's really important that we learn how to release that. So what I'm going to do is I want to share with you a Hawaiian chant that basically says, please just remove these things that make it so I can sleep better, and I can eat better, and I can drink better. And then we're going to set not only yourself free, but we'll set the rest of the world free too. And so it's normally a participation chant, and I'll show you how it's done. I'll just do it, and maybe as we go along, you guys can, when we end, we can participate. On the participation side, there's only four words, and the first two are the same. It's hey mu. It's preceded by 2 claps, and it means to just cast out. And then no, which is no is the third one, is to be free. And then the fourth one is also free the earth. So anyway, it goes, hey muoya, hey mu na moi, ino na moi moia, na pu no, na hao mea hey muoya. Hey mu, eli, noa, iai, no huno, hey muoya, hey mu na moi, ino na moi moia, na pu no, na hao mea he muea. He mu. Eli. Noa. Iai. No hunoa. He muea. He mu. He mu na moi ino na moi. Na pu no. Na hao mea he muea. He mu. Eli. Noa. Iai. No hunoa. And so anyway, traditionally in Hawaiian, when we're finished, we give a pu for it to acknowledge our ancestors, and then we say amamaua noa, or we are out of ceremony, let's say. Okay, so I'm just gonna blow a pu once. Amamaua noa. Mahalo. Okay.
5 o'clock alarm bell rings, same thing every day. Bell answer the phone, I'm not home, I'm already on my way. Out the door, down the street, got to keep me on my feet. I got coffee, I got donuts, in the office down the street. And the fat hat lady's faking a heart attack. And my manager yelling at me, say, can't give her money back. Blank call, the notice overdue. And that's just one more thing I gotta do till I get off the earth. Till I get off the earth.
Woo! Yay! Oh my gosh!
Yay, thank you, everyone.
Yay, thank you!
Thanks, everyone. Great job.
Right on time, on the time. Got to keep me on my feet.
Oh!
Contracts.
Kalani! Aloha! Oh, I miss you!